Thank you very much, Dr. Fernandez. It's been a pleasure to listen in on the philosophical discussion that's been going on. As you can tell from my introduction, in a different role, I work in the U.S. government, and so we have very practical considerations, and I think that tendency in my practice is reflected in my paper as well. So. Of course, I'm speaking today in my personal capacity and as a teacher at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., where I come to you from today. And I would like to thank you, Professor Fernandez, and certainly Professor Chitty for this marathon run of research presentations. I am, it's very early in the morning here, and I think you've been up all night from my perspective. So thank you for the effort that you and your colleagues at Macquarie University have put in for making this conference possible. And it has been a great pleasure to work with you over the last couple of years in contributing to this handbook, which I think will be very useful to people working in this field for many years to come. So for the past few years, I have been working on a method for measuring soft power, and this, I think, grows out of some practical considerations. I do observe that for other kinds of political power, military power, economic power, they're fairly well-established measures for comparing countries. And in a policy world where there has to be an allocation of resources, whether that's time or money or staff, the ability to measure something really means that it gets more attention. And in some ways, I think that in the policy discussions, the lack of a rough consensus even of how to measure soft power does mean that it gets short shrift in terms of commitment from policymakers and decision makers and other politicians. So I put my thinking cap on to try to address this. And in the process of doing that, I undertook a review of the quantitative research on soft power, which is a particular niche in this field. And that is the chapter that I've contributed to this handbook. It's a review of this quantitative literature. So I will go over some of this literature, just summarizing the main points that I think can be elicited from it. And also I will close with a short discussion of the soft power rubric, which is the method that I have developed for measuring soft power. So first of all, to begin, I come from the perspective that soft power really resides in civil society, in the minds of individual people who are agents in their own right and not necessarily biddable by the state. The fact that a country produces a lot of movies does not grow its soft power, for example. Rather, a lot of foreigners in other countries interested in watching those movies, that is the indicator that there may be some soft power influence. And I think that point is often overlooked a little bit in the literature. So what I have here on the screen, which our colleagues have so kindly put up for me, is figure 5.1, which is from the chapter in the handbook. And it presents my map of soft power producers and soft power audiences. And remember that it is the audience response that I think indicates that there is a soft power influence. So with arrow A there, that is the relationship between the soft power producer who might be taking action. So that country might be providing aid or have cultural programs. It could be, from the government, but more likely from civil society or from the economy, the market sources. And then that is the relationship between that production, that effort to produce soft power, and the audience. So these would be people in other countries who would be on the receiving end of these initiatives. And generally, the audience opinion in most of this research is measured by public opinion polls. Okay, so that's one aspect of this relationship. Arrow B there on the right is in reaction to the producer. The audience has an opinion, And that audience, based on that opinion, can take actions of its own. So the actions that the audience might take in reaction to their perception of the soft power producer would be to visit or study in that foreign country, to watch its movies or trade and invest there, or other similar activities. So this would be evidence of the soft power influence. And then arrow C is, are there actions that the audience member might take that actually change the audience society itself? So I think the most prominent example is if students travel to a soft power producer country to study, and then they come home and then they change conditions in their own society, that would be represented by arrow C. And so for arrows A, B, and C, there is some significant amount of quantitative research that has been done that shows these kinds of relationships. Now for arrows D, E, and F, this is in the effect of audience actions on public opinion and norms in the producer society. So that foreign student who goes to a soft power producer country to study, how do those students affect the host country where they are studying? So that would be the effect of their direct interaction with the audience, and then with arrow E, how those students change the public opinion of the host country about the student's country. And then finally with arrow F, how that host country or producer country may actually change itself and its views of the rest of the world. Now, to be frank, for D, E, and F, there's mostly qualitative research that's available. There isn't much quantitative research, but I wanted to draw the whole circle because I do think that soft power is a relationship between countries, and this is the type of relationships that are available to explore. So to return now to the literature that I'm going to review, I do begin in the chapter with studies that show how positive foreign public opinion does benefit a country's foreign policy. And I think one of the stronger examples in this literature is a piece by Goldsmith and Horiuchi. They studied 3 polls in 2002 and 2003 that asked 30,000 people in 45 countries their opinion of US foreign policy about different issues. And these researchers did find that those who have a favorable view of the United States are more likely to support US foreign policy initiatives, but not all initiatives to the same extent. They were more likely to support US initiatives that were high profile. And in this project that was sending troops to Iraq in 2003. But that foreign public opinion did not predict support for low profile issues like the US position on the International Criminal Court, which is probably something you don't even know what that is. But that's the point of the study, is that foreign public opinion can and does make a difference in foreign policy, but it's limited in its scope to high profile issues that are broadly known by the public. Okay, so with that as a point of departure, let's return to arrow A. What are the studies that show the influence, what influences public opinion? And there is a handful of good studies in this area. One is another by Horiuchi and Goldsmith, looking at effective and visible aid programs. And they looked at the US aid program PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. This is one of the better aid plans to come out of the United States in terms of effectiveness, and be well received in the countries where it's active. And this study did show that an increase in funding to a country from PEPFAR does increase the approval of the United States. Another study looked at high-level diplomatic visits, and that study shows that when credibility is high, high-level visits of the US President and the Secretary of State to a country do increase approval of the US. However, when US foreign policy credibility is low, in this case, when there were Abu Ghraib prison scandals broke out, and it became clear that the US had made intelligence mistakes, then US credibility was low, and they found that high-level visits actually undermined approval of US foreign policy. So this is a double-edged policy tool then, high-level diplomatic visits. And I think this very much echoes your work, Professor Chitty, about how ethics and virtue matter in soft power. Another study in this area that I would like to point out is Dr. Allen and Flynn and co-authors. They looked at the effect of direct social interaction between people. They conducted a survey of about 1,000 people in 14 countries that host US military bases. And they found that people who had direct interaction with the US military were more likely to have a positive view of the United States than those who had a friend who interacted directly, or those who only benefited economically but didn't have any direct interaction. And I believe this also echoes the work of Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize economist, who argues very strongly that trust can be developed among people who don't have other commonalities, but that trust really needs to be built over a series of direct social interactions and communication. Okay, so that's Arrow B. What kinds of things that a soft power producer country can do that might have an effect on an audience? Arrow B is how is foreign opinion reflected in foreigners' actions. Dr. Monti-Datta investigated a period when anti-Americanism was relatively high in 2000 to 2008. And he found that the sales of US brands, Coca-Cola and Starbucks, were very, very good. So he really very strongly argues here that US brands are not a good indicator of soft power influence. And this is contrary to much of the qualitative case study literature that you might see out there. His finding, based on the survey and based on field work, was that brands like Coca-Cola and Starbucks are actually deeply embedded in local economies. And so the customer's decision to buy a US brand doesn't have much to do with the United States. It has more to do with local tastes and those kinds of market conditions. In contrast, he looked at a different set of activities, whether people were visiting the United States or studying in the United States. And in this case, he found that people who had more favorable opinions of the United States do tend to visit and study there more. So he felt that those were better indicators of a positive attitude towards the United States. In a different arena, and sort of at a macro scale rather than at this more specific scale, Dr. Andrew Rose finds that there is a correlation between a country's positive opinion among foreigners and the total volume of trade with that country. And he finds that positive public opinion has a stronger correlation than other factors like common language or common regional trading area, which is quite a statement. And he found some countries are less affected by foreign opinion. And that is, he identified the United States and Russia, where their trade is not as affected by foreign public opinion. But some countries are more affected, and these would include Israel and North Korea. So there's a variation among countries about this effective opinion on trade. So that's for Arrow B, how foreigners take action based on their opinion of the soft power producer. Turning now to Arrow C, do the foreigners' actions influence values at home? And I'll just bring your attention to one large statistical study and then one very in-depth case study. The large statistical study is the one by Dr. Spilimbergo. He finds that there is strong evidence of positive impact through education. He looked at 183 countries from 1960 to 2005 for his data on students, and then on whether they had an impact on democratic transition in their home countries. He used the Freedom House Political Rights Index. It's quite an extensive study, and to sum up very quickly, he finds that for countries that send students abroad, the more that students go to study in democratic countries, the more likely the origin country will become more democratic within 5 years. And he's got quite a lot of specific examples that he pulls out of the data. The in-depth case study that I would refer you to is one by Dr. Carol Atkinson. She does a specialist case study on U.S. military education. It's that for many, many years, foreign military officers come to U.S. war and staff colleges for training. This is a cohort of international students who are exceptionally patriotic, and they often come from authoritarian countries with the goal of gaining technical information from U.S. military colleges. And so this is a group that you would think would be most resistant to U.S. political culture. But she does find that, taken as a whole, those foreign military officers who come from autocratic and middle ground countries, those that have military exchanges with the U.S. are more likely to democratize over a period of time than countries that did not. And she not only did surveys, but also did interviews and field work. And something that she found was that social interaction between these foreign military officers and other American students and other people in American society is quite a deliberate process during these exchanges. Some of the interaction is highly structured, as you might expect in classrooms. There is less structured interaction because these foreign military officers are encouraged to travel throughout the country. And then even less structured than that is that many of these officers bring their families with them. And so their families interact with American society, and that feedback comes through back to the officer. So I think this is another theme through some of this work, that the direct social interaction is very meaningful and impactful in making these relationships work. It's a lot of work to state the obvious, but we do have evidence of it in these studies. Particularly with these two studies, I think we always have to be aware of causality questions here. These studies show that international students, when they return home, tend to influence their home country to democracy, but neither of these studies, and most of the studies, don't measure the students before they come or before they depart for their studies. We do not know whether they are already more interested in democracies and therefore they choose to go to a democratic nation to study. But that's the major question that we have to be aware of when we look at this work. And there are similar work along this vein for migration and for travel and for watching movies. But in these arenas, I think the work is still in its early stages, and it's not really at a stage where you could definitively say that there are conclusions that we could rely on. I would mention here that there are really a lot of opportunities for further research, because most of this work has been done for democracies. A lot of it is centered on the US. And if the same methods were applied to different government styles and to other countries, the findings might actually be different. So that is something to wait and see for. If we could go to the next slide, I'll begin talking about the soft power rubric. Thank you very much. So the soft power rubric is what I've developed based on my investigation of the quantitative work and other theory and qualitative work. The goal is to develop some kind of framework that makes it possible to compare countries' soft power, different countries, maybe to make comparisons over time. I've identified 4 types of actions that foreigners take when they have an interest in a country. If they have a small interest, they can just watch a movie from that country. it or visit that country. If they want to make a bigger commitment, they might go there to study abroad. And the biggest commitment and investment would be to emigrate to that country. So that soft power rubric is the diagram that you see at the top. The table 1 and table 2 are some recent findings that I've developed. And this is data on visits, study abroad, and immigration, which are available from UN-related statistical agencies from about 1960 onward for a large set of studies. So for a large set of countries, so that comparison is actually possible. And I just showed the rankings that I have for 2019, 2020, which is about the most recent data available. It takes a couple of years for them to get published. On table 1, you can see the actual numbers of immigrants and foreign students and foreign visitors for each of these countries. I did include the data for Australia there, and you can see that it's for immigrants. Australia had about 7.7 million in 2020. For foreign students, 509,000. And for foreign visitors, this is 2019 data, about 9.5 million. So those are the raw data. What I do in table 2 is I've ranked all the countries I have in the data set by data series. So if you look at column B, immigrants, Australia ranks 9th in 2020. And for foreign students, it ranks 2nd in the world in 2019. And, or that might be 2020. I think that's an error. So 2nd in the world, Australia ranks very high. And then for foreign visitors, Australia ranks 43rd. And then I just sum those ranks across the row, and Australia has a sum of 54. And it's the sum of those ranks that I use to develop the total soft power rank. And to just give you some historical time frame, if we look back from about 2000 onward, pretty consistently at the top of this soft power rank list is the US, France, Great Britain, and Germany. And this is pretty consistent with public opinion polls such as they are available that are often used to assess soft power today. So that is a rough validation that this historical approach can be useful because it roughly parallels what we see with foreign public opinion, which is a completely different method for assessing soft power. And of course, the advantage of this soft power rubric approach is that there's a larger set of countries available for study, and a historical view is possible. So I'd like to close. I can see time is running out. A couple of points. This ranking that I've shown you has given equal weight to immigration, education, and travel. There are other things that could be added. The movies is not in here. If there is a data set on movies, that could certainly be very interesting to look at. Also, just based on the quantitative literature that I've discussed today, you might think that foreign students should be weighted more heavily. The ranking that I've shown is weighted these 3 series equally. If foreign students were weighted more heavily, Australia would go up the list. So there's a lot of possible different interpretations of the data. And finally, I would conclude that really, I do find that in this area, while there are a number of excellent studies, they are mostly about the US and Europe, and mostly about democracies. And so there's really a lot of room for more work. Okay, thank you very much.